The night shift at the Neptune listening station was usually quiet. Dr. Lena Farouk sat alone in the observation dome, surrounded by blinking lights and the soft hum of machines. She had been working there for almost 6 years, listening to the endless whispers of space, radio waves, background noise, echoes of distant stars. Most of it was routine and dull. Space, for all its mystery, was mostly silent. But that night something changed. It started as a flicker on her monitor, just a small spike in the signal pattern. At first she thought it was a system glitch, maybe interference from a passing comet or one of the mining drones near Neptune's rings. But when the same signal repeated, perfectly timed, her heart began to race. She adjusted the filters, cleared the background noise, and there it was again. A pulse. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, structure. Someone or something was sending a message. Lena leaned closer to the screen. The signal came from far beyond the mapped trade routes, from a system no human probe had ever reached. The coordinates showed a small dying star light years away. Her mind filled with questions. Could it be an ancient beacon? A lost satellite, or something alive? She recorded the data, running it through the translation algorithms. Nothing matched any known human or natural pattern. The frequency oscillated in repeating intervals that almost sounded like a heartbeat. The realization hit her. It was a distress call, a cry for help. She quickly called her assistant Raj, who was half asleep in the next room. "Raj, come here." "You need to see this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He rubbed his eyes and stumbled toward the console. Together they watched the waveforms rise and fall in perfect sequence. "This isn't random," Raj said slowly. "It's organized. Like someone's trying to say something." Lena nodded. "I think it's an SOS." For a few moments they both just stared at the screen, the signal repeating again and again, steady and haunting. It was faint, traveling through unimaginable distances, yet it carried emotion, desperation, fear, hope. They immediately sent the data to Earth Command. Protocol demanded it. Within minutes, the quiet station came alive. Alerts flashed across multiple channels, and other listening posts confirmed receiving the same signal. The frequency was unique but consistent everywhere. Someone far away was calling for help, and they had reached the humans. By the time Earth scientists convened the next morning, the world already knew. The media caught wind of the alien SOS. News outlets called it the most significant discovery in human history. Everyone had their own theory. Some said it was a trick, others believed it was the first real contact. Religious groups called it a divine test. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was a trap. But none of that mattered to Lena. She had heard it first, and she couldn't forget the sound. Back on Neptune Station, she continued decoding the message. It wasn't language in the traditional sense, it was math, geometry, and emotion mixed together. The signal repeated with minor variations, as if whoever sent it was trying to adapt, trying to make themselves understood. The pulses grew weaker every day, as though the sender was running out of energy. Lena barely slept. She replayed the transmission again and again, her eyes heavy but her mind racing. Each pulse felt alive, like a heartbeat fading with time. She started to imagine what the senders might look like. Were they trapped on a dying planet? Did they have families, homes, cities, dreams like humans did? Were they afraid? The government sent a team of linguists, physicists, and engineers to assist her. Together they mapped the signal's trajectory and confirmed it came from a small solar system with one habitable planet. The planet's energy output showed rapid decline. Its atmosphere was collapsing. Whoever was there didn't have much time. The situation divided humanity. Some argued that the signal should be ignored. Earth had too many problems of its own: poverty, climate change, political conflict. "We can't save ourselves," one politician said. "Why try to save someone else?" But others believed it was destiny. Humanity had always dreamed of life beyond Earth, and now that someone out there was calling for help, turning away would be unforgivable. Lena watched the debates on the screens with a heavy heart. To her, it wasn't a political question, it was personal. She could still hear the desperation in the signal every time she closed her eyes. She imagined a being on a distant world, looking at the sky and praying that someone somewhere might answer. One night, as the debate raged on, she went outside to the observation deck. From there, Neptune glowed faintly blue against the darkness. Beyond it stretched infinity, cold, endless, and full of secrets. She wondered if the sender was looking up at their own night sky, waiting for an answer that might never come. Suddenly, the console behind her beeped again. Another pulse. But this time it was weaker, barely there. Lena ran to the controls. The message had changed slightly. It was as if the sender knew time was running out. They had altered the sequence, almost like they were saying goodbye. Her chest tightened. She realized that by the time humanity decided whether or not to act, it might already be too late. She recorded a personal message to Earth Command. "We don't have time to argue," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "If there's even a chance that someone out there needs help, we should go. Even if it's dangerous. Even if we fail. We owe it to them and to ourselves." Her words struck a chord across the network. Scientists, explorers, and even ordinary people began to rally around her plea. Social media flooded with the phrase, "Answer the call." Within days, petitions spread across nations demanding a response mission. Humanity, for all its flaws and divisions, felt something awaken: curiosity, courage, and compassion. Lena stayed glued to her console as Earth Command deliberated. The days felt like years. Every hour she checked the transmission, hoping it was still there. Each time the signal grew fainter, like a voice whispering from the edge of death. Then, one morning, the signal vanished completely. The monitors showed only static. Lena stared at the empty screen for a long time, unable to move. Raj placed a hand on her shoulder, but she didn't respond. It felt like losing a friend she had never met. But later that same day, a message came from Earth Command. The Global Council had voted. They would send a fleet, a rescue mission. Humanity would answer. Lena exhaled in relief. The thought of people risking everything to reach an unknown world filled her with pride. The news spread across the solar system like wildfire. People cheered, cried, and prayed. It didn't matter whether the aliens were real, dangerous, or long gone. What mattered was that humanity had chosen hope over fear. That night, Lena returned to her post. The stars shimmered outside the viewing window. She whispered softly, "Hold on. We're coming." Even though there was no reply, she felt something deep inside her stir. A connection, a purpose. She knew the journey ahead would be dangerous, perhaps even fatal. But she also knew that this was the moment when humanity truly grew up. They were no longer just survivors of their own chaos. They were reaching out into the cosmos, not as conquerors, but as rescuers. Lena saved the final data logs and stared at the coordinates on her screen one last time. The dying star twinkled faintly on the map, a symbol of both tragedy and hope. Somewhere far away, an alien civilization had sent a message into the void, and of all the possible worlds it could have reached, it found the Deathworlders, the humans born from a planet of storms and struggle, and they had listened. The world was no longer the same after the alien signal was confirmed. Every news channel, every social platform, every conversation circled around one question: should humanity answer the call? For weeks the world had been divided. Some called it a miracle, others called it a trap. The governments argued, scientists debated, and people waited, hoping for a decision that never seemed to come. Dr. Lena Farouk watched from Neptune Station as the chaos unfolded. She had done her part. She had found the signal and proven it was real. But now the decision wasn't hers. It belonged to the Global Council, a group of leaders representing all major nations and colonies. They had the power to decide whether humanity would stay silent or take the biggest leap in history. The problem was that Earth wasn't in great shape. After decades of wars, droughts, and economic collapse, most countries were still recovering. Energy resources were stretched thin. Many people struggled just to survive. Sending ships across the stars seemed like an impossible dream. "We can't save ourselves," one council member said during a broadcast. "How can we save someone light years away?" Yet, despite the fear and exhaustion, something stirred inside people. Humanity had always been known for one thing: its stubbornness. Against every disaster, every crisis, humans had always found a way to fight back. And now, somewhere in the darkness of space, someone else was crying for help. The thought of ignoring that cry didn't sit well with everyone. Admiral Marcus Voss was one of those people. A tall, gray-haired veteran with sharp eyes and a voice that commanded respect. He had spent most of his life defending Earth's orbital borders. He had seen war, destruction, and loss, but he had also seen courage. When he heard about the alien SOS, he didn't hesitate for a second. If they're asking for help, he told the council, Then someone should go. The council chamber fell silent when he spoke. Everyone knew his reputation. He was the kind of man who didn't believe in politics, only duty. Some said he was too reckless, too bold. Others said he was exactly the kind of person humanity needed. The debate lasted for days. Scientists presented risks. The energy required for faster-than-light travel was massive. Engineers warned about technical limits. Some feared an ambush. What if the aliens weren't victims but predators? What if the distress call was bait? There were too many unknowns, but Admiral Voss stood firm. "We've faced extinction before," he said calmly. "We've faced famine, disease, and war. And yet we're still here. Maybe we're called Deathworlders for a reason. We survive. But survival means nothing if we forget compassion." His words spread beyond the council walls. Across the world, people began to echo his sentiment. Students, scientists, doctors, workers, everyone began to speak out. Social media exploded with the phrase, "We answer." For the first time in years, humanity seemed united by something greater than politics or borders. Still, the council hesitated. They knew what it meant to send a fleet. The journey would take years. The technology was experimental. The risks were enormous. But every passing day, the alien signal grew weaker. Lena kept sending updates from Neptune Station, begging them to hurry. "If we wait any longer," she wrote, "there won't be anyone left to save." Finally, after weeks of argument, the Global Council reached a decision. They would send a fleet. A limited one, just enough to reach the coordinates and investigate. If survivors were found, they would offer aid. If not, they would return. The mission's official name was Operation Dawnreach, but the soldiers and scientists who volunteered had their own name for it, the Deathworlder. Fleet, the name came from an old alien classification found in early contact theories. Some alien researchers believed that any species evolving on a planet as harsh as Earth, a world of storms, predators, and constant struggle, would be naturally dangerous and hard to kill. Humans, according to that theory, were born fighters, but in this case, the name carried pride, not fear. They would use their toughness not to destroy but to protect. Lena was invited to join the mission as chief xenolinguist. She was nervous but excited. "You found their voice," Admiral Voss told her. "Now help us understand it." She packed her research files and boarded the flagship Erebus, a massive vessel built for long-distance exploration and defense. Around her, hundreds of crew members prepared for launch. Engineers checking the engines, medics organizing supplies, pilots running diagnostics. Every person there knew they might not return, yet none backed down. Before departure, the fleet gathered in orbit around the moon. The view was breathtaking, Earth glowing blue and green below, surrounded by the quiet blackness of space. Millions of people watched the live broadcast as Admiral Voss stood before the cameras in his dark uniform. "Many will call this mission foolish," he began. "They'll say we should stay home and mind our own world. But we are not built to ignore a cry for help. Humanity has been through fire and darkness, and each time we chose to stand together. We are the Deathworlders, not because we bring death, but because we endure it and rise stronger. Tonight we carry that strength beyond our world." The speech spread hope like wildfire. On Earth, people gathered in cities, lighting candles and holding up signs that read, "Safe journey and bring them home." For once, humanity wasn't divided by fear. They were united by courage. As the countdown began, Lena took her seat beside Raj, who had been assigned as her communication partner. The engines roared softly as the ships aligned. Her heart pounded. She thought about the signal, the strange pulses, the dying voice. She whispered quietly, "Hold on. We're coming." The engines flared, lighting up the void. One by one, the ships jumped into the darkness, their forms vanishing into streaks of light. The fleet had begun its journey across the stars, but back on Earth, not everyone was hopeful. Some believed the mission was a waste of resources. What if they never come back? A news anchor said, "What if they bring danger home with them?" Fear lingered even among those who wanted to believe. Admiral Voss knew these doubts well. He had read every report, every protest message. He carried the weight of all those fears. But he also carried humanity's last shred of faith, that even after all the wars and suffering, people could still choose to do the right thing. Lena, meanwhile, couldn't sleep. The hum of the ship filled her cabin. Outside her window, stars stretched endlessly. She kept thinking about the aliens who had sent the signal. Were they alive? Were they watching the sky, hoping for an answer? She hoped so. Days turned into weeks as the fleet prepared for long-range travel. The crew trained constantly, checking life support systems, calibrating drives, and rehearsing first contact procedures. Tension mixed with excitement. Every person aboard knew they were part of something bigger than themselves. In one quiet moment, Lena sat with Admiral Voss in the observation deck. The old soldier gazed at the stars in silence before speaking. "Do you think they're still out there?" he asked. Lena smiled faintly. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think they believed someone would come. That's why they sent the message," he nodded. "Then we'll make sure their hope wasn't wasted." As the Erebus moved farther from the solar system, the crew received their final transmission from Earth, a simple message from the Global Council. "You carry our light into the darkness. May it never fade." For a moment, the entire ship went silent. Then applause filled the halls. It wasn't just a mission anymore, it was a promise. A promise that humanity, no matter how broken, still had heart. Lena looked once more at the stars and thought about how strange life was. Only a few years ago, humans had nearly destroyed themselves. Now they were crossing galaxies to help a species they had never met. It made her believe that maybe there was still hope. For Earth, for everyone. As the fleet vanished into deep space, the people of Earth watched their tiny lights fade into the void. For the first time in centuries, they didn't see darkness as something to fear. They saw it as a place where their courage now lived, flying between stars, guided by a simple message, a cry for help, and an answer born from the heart of humanity. The journey through space was longer and harder than anyone had imagined. When the fleet left Earth's solar system, people cheered, sang, and cried with pride. But once the stars of home faded behind them, reality began to set in. The fleet, led by Admiral Marcus Voss aboard the Erebus, was heading into the unknown, 42 light-years away from the nearest human colony. There were no rescue lines, no backup systems beyond what they carried. Every person on those ships knew that if something went wrong, there would be no help coming. Dr. Lena Farouk spent most of her days inside the communications lab, surrounded by blinking consoles and screens full of alien data. Even though the signal had stopped weeks before launch, she replayed the last recordings over and over again. The strange pulse patterns had become like a song she couldn't forget. Each time she listened, she felt the same chill run down her spine. There was fear in that signal, but also hope. The first few months of the journey were calm. The ships were running smoothly, the crew well-rested and morale high. The Erebus was a masterpiece of human engineering, built to withstand deep space radiation and cosmic storms. It carried over 300 people, scientists, engineers, soldiers, and medics, all united by one purpose, to answer a call for help. Life on board followed a strict routine. The crew worked in 12-hour shifts, maintaining systems, running simulations, and scanning the surrounding space for anomalies. When they weren't working, they exercised in the gravity chambers, watched old Earth movies, or wrote messages to their families. Every week, Admiral Voss held short briefings reminding everyone why they were there. But as weeks turned into months, the sense of adventure began to fade. The stars outside never changed. There was no sunrise, no sunset, only the endless black sea of space. The silence began to weigh on them. Humans were not made for such emptiness. Then came the first storm. A massive radiation wave from a collapsing star hit the fleet without warning. The ship's shields absorbed most of the impact, but systems flickered and alarms blared. The Erebus shook violently. Lena grabbed onto her console as the lights dimmed. For a few terrifying minutes, they were flying blind. When the power stabilized, the crew discovered that one of the smaller escort ships had taken severe damage. 3 crew members were injured, and communications with another vessel were temporarily lost. Admiral Voss appeared calm, but everyone could see the tension in his eyes. "We knew this journey wouldn't be easy," he said over the intercom. "We fix what's broken and keep moving. We don't stop until we reach that planet." Those words became a new mantra for the crew. They repaired what they could and continued forward. But after that storm, the mood on board changed. The endless darkness felt heavier. Lena found comfort in small things: the laughter of crew members in the cafeteria, the soft hum of the engines, or the occasional call from Raj, her assistant. who liked to joke that they were the farthest humans ever to miss coffee. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the void. Every time she looked out the observation window, the stars seemed a little too quiet. One night, while running a routine scan, Lena picked up something unusual. A faint echo, barely noticeable but familiar. She called Raj over. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the screen. The pulse pattern looked eerily similar to the alien SOS, though much weaker and distorted. "Could it be interference?" Raj asked. Lena shook her head. "No, it's too structured. It's the same frequency band as before. Someone's still out there." They reported it to Admiral Voss, who immediately ordered the fleet to adjust course slightly. It wasn't much, but it gave the crew new energy. For the first time in weeks, there was a sign that the aliens might still be alive. The fleet continued onward, crossing asteroid fields and dense dust clouds that looked like frozen storms. At times, it felt like sailing through oceans of glittering glass. But the beauty of space could not hide its danger. A small navigational error could send them drifting for eternity. As they approached the halfway point of their journey, exhaustion began to take its toll. Some crew members became irritable and restless. Sleep cycles were disturbed. The endless darkness started to feel like a living thing pressing down on them. One engineer had a breakdown, screaming that they were all going to die in the void. He was sedated and taken to the medical bay. Admiral Voss called a meeting for all department heads. "We can't let fear spread," he said. "Keep your teams focused. Remind them why we're here. We didn't come this far to fall apart." Lena tried her best to keep her team motivated. She organized small gatherings in the lab, telling stories about early space exploration, how humans once crossed oceans with wooden ships, not knowing if they'd reach the other side. "We're doing the same," she said with a smile. "Only the sea is bigger." The crew began calling her Signal Mother, a nickname she found both funny and touching. Whenever someone felt scared or lonely, they would visit her lab, listen to the recorded alien message, and remind themselves that they were not alone in the universe. Months passed, and finally, the fleet began to approach the target system. The alien star was weak, barely glowing, and surrounded by drifting debris. The closer they got, the weaker the alien signal became. Lena's heart pounded as she tried to clean up the noise and pull any remaining data. But then, just as they crossed into the system, the signal vanished completely. "Signal's gone," Raj whispered. Lena stared at the monitor, feeling a sharp pain in her chest. They were so close. Admiral Voss gave the command to slow the fleet and begin orbital scans of the planet that matched the coordinates. When the first images appeared on the main screen, everyone fell silent. The planet was dying. Its surface was cracked and scorched. Oceans boiled away, and massive dust storms choked the atmosphere. It looked like a graveyard. "Dear God," someone whispered. The scans showed faint traces of artificial structures, cities half buried under ash and rock. Radiation levels were high, but not impossible. There was still a chance. "Prepare a landing team," Admiral Voss ordered. "We're going down," Lena volunteered immediately. She had come too far to stop now. As she suited up in her pressure armor, her hands trembled, not from fear but anticipation. All the months of travel, all the hardship, it was finally leading to this moment. The descent through the planet's atmosphere was rough. Lightning storms flashed across the sky and the ship's hull groaned under pressure. When they finally broke through the clouds, they saw the ruins up close. Gigantic towers lay in pieces, strange symbols carved into their surfaces. The landscape looked lifeless, like a world that had lost hope long ago. Lena's team landed near what appeared to be a collapsed city. The air was thin and full of ash. They walked carefully through the wreckage, scanning for movement or life. For hours, there was nothing but silence and the sound of their own breathing through helmets. Just when they began to lose hope, one of the scanners beeped. Faint life signs, deep underground. The team followed the readings to a partially buried structure. They used plasma cutters to break through the debris. Inside, they found what looked like a shelter, and then they saw them. A group of fragile, pale-skinned beings huddled in the darkness. Their eyes glowed faintly under the dim light of their machines. They were weak, trembling, and clearly starving. When the first of them saw the humans, it tried to move back in fear, but there was no strength left. Lena stepped forward slowly, raising her hand in peace. "It's okay," she said softly, even though they couldn't understand her. We heard your call. We came to help. The aliens made faint sounds, soft, broken tones that reminded her of the signal she had decoded months ago. She felt tears well up in her eyes. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. The team quickly set up medical pods and began giving oxygen and nutrition. Admiral Voss's voice came through the comms, full of awe. You found them, he said quietly. After all this time, we actually found them. As the surviving aliens were stabilized, Lena recorded their first clear message. It was weak, trembling, but unmistakably grateful. The aliens repeated a phrase that translated roughly to "You came." Lena smiled through tears. For all the dangers, the storms, and the endless silence, this moment made it all worth it. Humanity had crossed the black ocean of space, not for conquest or power, but for compassion. They had answered a dying world's cry, and in that broken planet's shadow, under a fading sun, the Deathworlders became saviors. The surface of the alien planet was like nothing the humans had ever seen. It was a land of silence and shadows, broken cities stretching across miles of cracked ground. The sky was dark orange, filled with swirling dust and lightning that flashed without sound. The air smelled like burnt metal and old smoke. Every step the rescue teams took left deep marks in the ash that covered everything. It was clear that this world had once been alive, filled with light and movement. But now it was dying. Dr. Lena Farouk stood on a ridge, looking over what had once been a city. The alien architecture was breathtaking even in ruin. Towers shaped like spirals, massive domes that had collapsed inward, and strange bridges that hung in the air like frozen waves. It was hard to imagine what kind of beings had lived here, what kind of dreams they had built, or what disaster had destroyed it all. The landing teams had spread out across several sectors, each one searching for more survivors. So far, Lena's group had found only one underground shelter, where a handful of aliens had been clinging to life. They were weak, fragile, and barely breathing when the humans reached them. The medics worked quickly, giving oxygen, heat, and a form of synthesized food that could be absorbed through the skin. The aliens' bodies were thin and almost transparent, their veins glowing faintly with a soft blue light. When the first alien opened its eyes and looked at Lena, she felt a shiver go through her. Its gaze was full of fear, confusion, and hope all at once. It tried to speak, but the sounds it made were broken and faint. Still, Lena smiled and gently touched her chest, saying, "Human." Then she pointed at herself, then at the sky. From another world. The alien blinked slowly, as if trying to understand. Then it placed a trembling hand on its own chest and made a soft sound, something like Aeon. Lena realized it was giving her its name. Over the next few days, the humans worked non-stop. They set up portable domes with breathable air and artificial warmth. The atmosphere outside was too toxic for the aliens, so the team built small safe zones using whatever power they could spare. Admiral Voss sent messages back to the Erebus reporting that they had found life. The message that went back to Earth was short but powerful. They live. When that message reached Earth, it changed everything. Across the planet, people cried, prayed, and celebrated. For the first time in history, humanity was not alone. But for those on the alien world, there was little time for celebration. The aliens were dying fast, their bodies were fragile, and the planet's radiation was slowly killing them. Lena spent hours beside them trying to communicate. She used drawings, symbols, and sound patterns, comparing them with the old SOS signal. It was difficult, but slowly she began to understand pieces of their language. The aliens spoke in tones that shifted like music, each sound carrying emotion as well as meaning. They were not a violent people. Their history, as she began to piece it together, was full of art, science, and harmony. But their technology had failed them. According to what she could decode, their sun had begun to die centuries ago. They tried to save their world by creating machines that could hold the planet's atmosphere together. But something went wrong. The machines became unstable, poisoning the air and burning the surface. The aliens had sent the SOS long ago when their hope was fading. They never expected anyone to hear it. Lena listened to one of the survivors, Ain, try to explain their story through gestures and symbols. He pointed to the sky and mimed a circle breaking apart. His voice shook as he made the sound that matched the dying signal they had sent. When Lena realized what he meant, she felt her throat tighten. They had called for help until their last energy source failed. The message humanity received had been their final cry. Admiral Voss arrived at the surface to oversee operations. His usual calm face looked older under the planet's dull light.
How bad is it?
He asked Lena. She hesitated. Most of their people are gone, she said softly. The few we've found can't survive long here. Their world is collapsing faster than we thought. Voss nodded, staring at the broken skyline. Then we take them with us, he said simply. It wasn't an easy task. The fleet had limited room and oxygen. Transporting even a few dozen survivors would strain their supplies for the return journey. But no one argued. They all knew it was the only choice. Humanity hadn't crossed 42 light-years to watch an entire species die. The engineers began constructing small stasis pods to carry the aliens safely through space. Each pod required precise environmental controls, temperature, radiation shielding, and atmosphere simulation. Lena helped design the language interface for the pods, labeling everything in both English and the aliens' tonal symbols. It was exhausting work, but she didn't care. Every time she saw the fragile aliens sleep peacefully in the new pods, she felt a spark of pride. Outside, storms raged stronger each day. The planet was tearing itself apart. Great cracks opened in the ground, and rivers of molten rock flowed where cities had once stood. The sky grew darker as the sun flickered like a dying candle. The fleet had to evacuate quickly or risk being trapped forever. During the final night on the surface, Lena stood near the landing ship, looking at the horizon. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying dust that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Ain approached her, supported by a medic. He looked weak but calm. In his trembling hand, he held a small crystal sphere, something that glowed softly from within. He pressed it into her palm. "What is this?" she asked. Ain pointed to his chest, then to the ground, and finally to the stars. "Memory," he whispered in his broken English. Lena understood. It was a piece of their world, a record of who they had been. She closed her hand around it and nodded. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. When the last of the survivors were loaded onto the transport ships, Admiral Voss gave the final order to leave the planet. The engines roared to life, lifting through choking clouds and lightning storms. From above, the surface looked like a cracked mirror, glowing faintly red. As the fleet rose higher, the planet's crust began to collapse. Great waves of fire spread across the continents. Lena watched in silence, tears streaming down her face. She thought about all the lives that had once lived there. The laughter, the art, the dreams, all erased by time and failure. She whispered softly, "You're not forgotten." Once they reached orbit, the fleet turned toward the stars. The survivors were placed in medical bays aboard the Erebus, where doctors monitored their vitals. Despite their weakness, the aliens showed signs of recovery. Their bodies adapted slowly to the artificial environment. For the first time, their glowing eyes no longer looked afraid. Days later, N woke fully and looked around the room. He saw Lena sitting nearby, writing notes on her tablet. When she noticed him awake, she smiled. He tried to speak, his voice still weak, and managed a few words. "Your world? Strong." Lena chuckled softly. "Maybe too strong," she said. "But we're learning." He looked at her for a long moment, then touched her hand gently. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaking but clear. It was the first time a human and an alien had shared words not of fear, but of gratitude. When Admiral Voss visited later, he stood by the window watching the stars slide by. "You did good work, Doctor," he said quietly. Lena shook her head. "We all did. They're alive because of everyone." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But you gave them a voice again." As the fleet began its long journey back home, the crew gathered in the main hall to watch a final transmission from the dying planet. The planet's surface was almost entirely gone now, its light fading into darkness. For a moment, the image flickered, and then disappeared completely. Silence filled the room. Then Lena stepped forward and played the recording of the alien message she had decoded earlier. The haunting tones echoed through the hall, the same sounds that had started this whole journey. Everyone listened quietly. The message, once a cry for help, now felt like a song of farewell. When it ended, Admiral Voss looked around at his crew. "They sent a call into the dark," he said softly, "and we answered. That's what makes us human." Lena held the crystal sphere Anne had given her. Its light shimmered faintly in her hands like a heartbeat that refused to die. She realized that even though the alien planet was gone, its spirit would live on through this small piece of memory, and through the humans who had chosen to care. As the fleet drifted deeper into the stars, Lena looked out of the window one last time. Somewhere far behind them, a sun had died, but ahead lay millions more, each one a promise, each one a chance to begin again. The journey back to Earth was long and quiet. After the chaos and danger of the dying planet, space suddenly felt too still. The stars outside the ship didn't move, and the endless black stretched forever. The fleet was carrying the last survivors of an entire world, fragile beings who had lost everything. The humans felt both proud and heartbroken. They had saved lives, but they couldn't save the planet. Dr. Lena Farouk sat in the observation deck of the Erebus, staring at the stars. The small crystal sphere N had given her rested in her hands. Its faint blue glow pulsed slowly, almost like a heartbeat. She often held it while thinking about what they had witnessed. The broken cities, the dying skies, and the faces of the aliens who had once looked at the stars with hope. Just like humans, Ian and the few remaining survivors were recovering in the medical section. The doctors had managed to stabilize them, though their bodies were still weak. They communicated in simple words and symbols now. Every day they learned a few new English words, and Lena helped them understand human culture, showing them pictures of Earth, mountains, forests, oceans, and blue skies. The aliens, whose home had been lost, often stared at those images with wide, glowing eyes, whispering softly in their own language. Lena didn't understand the words, but she could feel what they meant. It was awe and longing. Admiral Marcus Voss kept the fleet on strict course, but even he had changed. He no longer spoke with the same iron tone. He spent more time walking among the crew, talking, listening, and checking on the alien survivors. He had led many missions in his life, but none had touched him like this one. He often told the crew, "This is the first time we've fought for something not human. Remember that." As the fleet crossed back through interstellar space, the humans began sending data back to Earth. They transmitted recordings, scientific reports, and Lena's translations of the alien messages. But the most powerful transmission was a short one, just a few seconds long. It was Anne's voice, trembling but clear, saying in broken English, "They came. You came." When that message reached Earth, the entire planet stopped to listen. For the first time in human history, a voice from another world spoke directly to them. Not in fear, not in war, but in gratitude. The news spread across every country. People filled the streets watching the message replay on giant screens. Children cried, parents smiled, and strangers hugged each other. It didn't matter what language they spoke or what country they were from. For once, humanity felt like one people. On board the Erebus, Lena watched the broadcast with tears in her eyes. Raj, sitting beside her, whispered, "We actually did it. We made contact." Lena nodded slowly. "No," she said softly. "They made contact. We just listened." The fleet continued its slow return journey. It would take months to reach home, but the mood had changed completely. The crew who once felt lost now carried a sense of purpose. They weren't just travelers, they were messengers of hope. The alien survivors began to recover faster than expected. Their bodies, though delicate, started adapting to the ship's artificial environment. They even began helping the engineers, showing strange mathematical patterns that could improve energy systems. Their intelligence was remarkable. Even in their weakened state, they wanted to share knowledge, not ask for more help. Lena and Anne grew close. They spent hours together, communicating through gestures and a mix of broken words. One day, Lena asked him why they had sent the SOS so far away, how they even knew other life might exist. Anne thought for a moment, then pointed to the stars visible through the window. "We believe," he said slowly. "If sky is big, someone listen." That sentence stayed in Lena's heart forever. It summed up everything. The reason they sent the call, the reason humanity answered. The universe was vast and lonely, but someone had believed enough to call into the dark, and someone else had believed enough to answer. As the fleet entered the outer edge of the solar system, the crew could finally see the distant glow of the sun. Everyone gathered at the observation decks, staring at the small familiar light. Many of them hadn't seen Earth's sun in over a year. Some cried quietly. For them, it wasn't just a return home. It was proof that they had survived what no one thought possible. Earth Command prepared a grand welcome. Every major city was preparing celebrations, but the returning fleet didn't want fame or glory. Most of them were tired, humbled by what they had witnessed. Admiral Voss made a single announcement before arrival. We left as explorers. We return as witnesses. Let us remember what we found, not for pride, but for purpose. When the Erebus finally entered Earth's orbit, thousands of ships and satellites turned their sensors toward it. The landing was broadcast live across the world. Crowds filled every spaceport holding signs that read, "Welcome home and for all worlds." As the ship descended through the blue atmosphere, Lena looked out the window. She saw oceans, green lands, and white clouds, and for the first time, she felt how precious her world really was. When the airlock doors opened, the crew stepped onto the platform, greeted by blinding lights and roaring cheers. But the moment everyone waited for came when the aliens emerged. Anne and the others stepped carefully into Earth's air, supported by medics, their translucent skin glowing faintly in the sunlight. The crowd went silent. No one knew what to say. Then as Anne looked around at the sea of faces, he smiled weakly and lifted his thin hand. The crowd erupted into applause and tears. Reporters shouted questions, scientists hurried forward, and children waved flags. But Lena stayed beside Ian, making sure he was safe. She noticed how he looked at the sky, blue and full of light, and whispered something in his own language. She didn't understand the words, but she knew the feeling. It was wonder. Over the following days, the alien survivors were moved to a protected research facility, where scientists and doctors worked together to help them adjust. Lena stayed with them as a translator and friend. She spent her days recording their stories, learning their music-like language, and helping them understand human customs. The more she learned, the more she realized how similar they were. They had families, art, love, and fear. They had made mistakes just as humans had. Meanwhile, Earth itself began to change. The mission had united people in a way that no war or government could have. Countries began sharing technology and resources more freely. New programs were started for deep space exploration, not for conquest, but for connection. The words "they came, you came" became a symbol of hope, printed on walls, posters, and even school books. Children grew up hearing the story of the SOS from the stars, and how the Deathworlders, humans, from the harshest world, had answered with kindness instead of violence. Months later, the Global Council held a special ceremony to honor the fleet. Admiral Voss refused to take personal credit. Instead, he asked Lena to speak. She stood before the cameras, her heart pounding, and said in simple words, "We went looking for a signal, but what we found was ourselves. In their struggle, we saw our past. In their hope, we saw our future." Her words spread across the world, becoming a message of unity. People began to believe that humanity could do more than survive, that they could care, build, and protect life beyond their own world. But for Lena, the story didn't end with speeches or fame. She spent her nights in the observation center, still watching the stars. En sometimes joined her. He had grown stronger and learned to speak more fluently. Together they often sat in silence, just looking out into the dark sky. One night he turned to her and said softly, "You saved us." Lena smiled gently. "No," she said, "you saved us too. You reminded us what it means to be human." En nodded thoughtfully. "Then we save each other." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the stars, and whispered, "Yes, we save each other." Later that year, Lena received approval for a new project, the construction of the Dawn Reach Array, a powerful transmitter built to send messages deep into space. Its purpose was not to ask for help, but to let the universe know that humanity was here, and that they were willing to listen, to help, and to connect. On the day the array was activated, Lena placed Anne's crystal sphere inside the main chamber. The light from it mixed with the pulse of the transmitter, creating a glowing wave that traveled across the galaxy. It was humanity's new message, a promise carried on light. When the signal left Earth, billions of people watched the broadcast. The same phrase echoed across the world, repeated in every language. They were not gods, but they came anyway. Those words became legend. In the years that followed, the story of the alien SOS and the Deathworlder fleet became one of humanity's greatest tales. It was taught in schools, sung in songs, and remembered in monuments. But to Lena and those who had been there, it wasn't just history. It was a reminder of the moment humanity chose compassion over fear. As she grew older, Lena often looked at the stars and wondered if somewhere, far away, another voice was calling out. If it did, she knew humanity would answer again and again. Because once long ago an alien SOS had reached the Deathworlders, and they had answered not with war, but with a fleet full of courage, hope, and heart.